Hi everyone, this is Veronica with Sew It Seams, and welcome back to my studio. Today in our Dear Jane quilt journey, we are going to be working on block K-4, which is also called Thea's Turn. This block is a really good one to showcase special fabric because we have this center square here which is quite large. So if you have a special fabric that you wanted to showcase, this is it. I don't really have a special fabric. I just have my 30s prints, and today this block is going to be made out of some red fabric. For today's fabric choices, I've chosen this red 30s print, and it's got some cute little children, little girls and boys, and some ducks and bunnies and little animals. It's just very cute. So that's going to be my main focus fabric, and my background fabric is going to be my muslin fabric. Before I get into the details of making this block, I wanted to look at Jane's block that she made for her quilt, and then the drawing that Brenda Papadakis did. When we look at first the drawing, it's pretty straightforward. We've got our center square, then we're going to have just triangles in the corners, and then some other triangles all around. But when we look at Jane's block, yes, she has the center square and she's got her triangles, but when you really look at it, on her smaller triangles, she has added a strip of her background fabric. And then when I took a closer look at this block within the quilt, she also added a strip of this muslin all around. I'm not quite sure what Jane was accomplishing with this particular block, but trying to do an exact replica would really be a lot of fussiness, and I think I would have a headache just trying to get these strips in here and get these triangles in here lining up properly. It just seems like a mess to me. So I'm going to be following the simplified line drawing that we have on this page, just so I don't have to deal with these little strips on the triangles. I just can't quite wrap my head around how I would do that. To first start off for this block, cut one square out of your focus fabric at 3.5 inches, and then out of your background fabric, cut 2 squares that are 2 3/4 inches, and also cut a square out of your focus fabric, also 2 3/4 inches. This square we're going to leave alone, but for each of these 2 3/4 inch squares, we're going to cut them all on the diagonal 2 times. So then that way we're going to end up with 4 on each one. After cutting the 2 3/4 inch square on the diagonal twice, I now have 8 triangles of my muslin and 4 triangles of my focus fabric. And the layout of these is basically going to be in groups of 3. So we'll have on one side, the triangles will be basically in this kind of a direction. And then we'll have these in this direction. This one, they're starting to overlap a little. This one will be in this direction. And then our last one will be in this direction. So this is basically the border around this little square that'll be right in the center. So what you're going to do is sew these together into 3-piece units. Sewing triangle units together can be a little tricky. When you take your triangle pieces and you start stitching them together, you can't just line them up like that, or they won't line up properly when you have that seam allowance. They'll be off center and off kilter from each other. So what I've done is on the back of my center red piece, I've drawn a stitching line on either side, and then on the back of my muslin I've drawn a stitching line on one side of each muslin piece. So what I'm going to do is show you how I kind of line that up. We're going to be working with from the back side of the red. To make it easier to see what's happening, I'm going to put this green background. But I've got my muslin down, and I'm going to put my red fabric over, and I want this stitching line to match up to the edge of my muslin. And you can see here, my stitching line is coming along, but it doesn't match the edge of my muslin at all. So I need to shift this down until that 1/4 of an inch stitching line matches right up to the edge of my muslin. And I've lined this up, and then you can see, I'm going to move that just a little bit, you can see my stitching line also matches to the end of this muslin over here. So this way, when I do that stitching and then I fold over and press, it's going to line up really well. So let me get this stitched and I'll show you what I mean. I now have my stitching line right there. I'm going to press the seam. And now when you look at it, you can see how the end of my fabric lines up really well on both sides. So now we're going to do the other side. Same kind of situation. I'm going to flip this over, and this, sometimes it's best to make sure you have it in the right order. So I'm looking, this fabric is going to be stitched to this one. So I would flip that over like that. And now I kind of know what I'm doing here. I move my muslin. Okay, so the point, the end of my stitching line is going to the end of the fabric. I'm going to flip this over. Now I press the seam the other way, but if I move it back, you can see that my stitching line comes right into the little point, the little divot here between both of those fabrics. It comes right to the edge there. So this is lined up, and I will stitch this line. I now have this stitching line done, and I need to turn this over so I can press. And here is one 3 triangle unit sewn together. I'm going to do the same thing with 3 more of these triangle units so that I can have all 4 ready to sew onto the center square. Now that my 3 triangle units are sewn together, I'm now going to stitch them to the outer borders of this block. So we line them up, making sure that we have them so that the point of the foundation fabric is pointing toward the square. On each of the 3 triangle units, I'm going to draw my 1/4 of an inch stitching line so that I can line that up and stitch that to my square. So I'm going to stitch the opposite sides, and then I'll press those and then stitch the other 2 opposite sides. I've gotten the 3 triangle units sewn onto each side, and the Next part is to sew the last triangles that go onto each of these corners. Before I can sew those on, I marked already the 1/4 of an inch that I need to trim here. So I'm just going to show you very quickly. What I did is I lined up my ruler so that my point is at that 1/4 of an inch seam allowance side there, and then drew a line, so that'll be trimmed off. And I made sure that it was lined. You can see that my diagonal is going straight through. My lines are lined up with all of my seams on the block. So I'm just going around on all of these edges here and just trimming those up so I can get the triangles on there. For the triangles that are on each corner of this block, you're going to cut 2 squares that are 2 3/4 of an inch square, and then cut them on the diagonal 1 time. So here are my 2 squares, and I've cut them on the diagonal. So now these triangles will be sewn to the sections that I just trimmed where the muslin is. So I'm going to draw a 1/4 of an inch line, and I'm going to sew these triangles right onto the seams there, and then I'll be able to trim up my block. Now that the triangles are sewn on, we're going to trim this block down to size. And you can see when I line it up, it's just these triangles that need to be trimmed. Everything else is going to be lining up just perfectly. So let's go trim this block. And that completes block K-4, also called Thea's Turn, from the Dear Jane quilt book. I hope you enjoyed the walkthrough of making this block with me. And if you have any questions or comments, you can leave them below, or you can send me an email at sewitseamscreations@outlook.com. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. You can also subscribe, and you can click that notification bell to be notified each time I upload a video, which is every Monday. This is Veronica Johnson with Sew It Seams, and I'll see you next time.